You are listening to the Push Media Podcast Network.
This is good shit.
My fellow comrades, I have but one question. With the enemy fast approaching, with the Russians invading our land, our families' lives at stake, our very way of life threatened, I have but one question to ask of each and every one of you who bravely chose to defend your land, your home country of the Ukraine, and were legally not allowed to leave if you were over the age of 18 and had a penis. We thank you for your service regardless. I have but one question. As we look the enemy in the face, we look death in the face. The enemy may have anthropomorphic tanks. They may have go-go gadget, ride the duck tour tanks with missiles on them. They may have all of those things. So I ask of each and every one of you, are you going to be a stand-up hoe or a fall-down bitch? So that was a rousing speech that I imagine happened in the Ukraine not that long ago, of a leader rousing up the brave men who are stuck defending their country, their home of the Ukraine against Russia. And the man giving that speech to these brave men of the Ukraine happened to also be a very big sugar-free fan. So that's the type of humor, that's what I'm offering you here at the program. I'm offering you vivid imagery based on current events with a through line of absolute nonsense. I want all of the credit for informing you and educating you as to the haps of the world. You dig? You feel me? But I want absolutely none of the accountability. Is that an extraordinary, borderline impossible ask of me? Probably. It's certainly unfair, and it's definitely kind of cheating on my part. But I think, and I'm kind of being tongue-in-cheek because where else would I keep my tongue? It's already in my mouth, you fucking moron. But I think there's some validity to the idea that things, particularly very serious things, can only be processed with a tad bit of levity. Because there's nothing funny about going to war. War sucks. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And I won't say it again because, cheap joke. War's terrible. But war is happening. And as long as I've been alive as a person, there's been one that America has been involved in. And it's fucking exhausting living through history. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last 2 years or so because I've made this case before, if you listen to the show, that anyone kind of roughly my age, I'm going to say 18 to 35-year-old age, pretty much all of your life, every predominant, relatively separate era, your early childhood to middle school, high school, all those things, were pretty much dominated by a cultural backdrop of fucking calamity all the time. Now, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not even here to begin to attempt to blame anyone for any of the things that happened, other than Osama bin Laden, because he is responsible for anything bad that's ever happened. Pay no attention to the fact that the CIA had a code name for him, named Tim. So anyone named Tim, be on the lookout for terrorist plans and plots against the greatest country that has ever been. Or if you're named Tim, be on the lookout for them to steal ideas for your podcast. Who knows? All I'm saying, Osama bin Laden and Tim Dillon. That's all. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point of that little brief detour. But back to the larger point at hand. All of my life consciously thus far has been dominated by war, stock market collapse, Donald Trump becoming president for better or worse. Just it seems like unprecedented time all the time. And then I think I might just be really in my bag, thinking my shit don't stink. Maybe everyone who is the young person of the day thinks that about whenever they were alive. And you could probably make a case to back that up. Maybe if you're 50, you're sure you've lived through some shit, but I kind of feel like if you were a prospering adult in the 90s, you didn't have much problem. The Friends was on all the time. People loved it. Credit cards were not a problem. Homes actually were you would receive money if you bought a home. And Bill Clinton was the first black president to play the saxophone. So it was a simpler time. I was born at the tail end of the 90s. The best part of the 90s that I got to benefit from were things like Cat Dog and Banging a Pot and Pan when it turned the year 2000. But then I had to follow that up with leaving kindergarten particularly unexpectedly early one day in September the following fucking year. So I say this to really illustrate the fact that most people, if you're a younger-ish person, you've never really known a time where it's been a slow news day. I guess that was my Johnny Carson. I don't even get that joke. That was me repeating something I heard someone else say before without having any grasp of it actually, and now I've caught myself in a lie, in a tanglement of my own deception, looking like a spanked ass. And yet there is a simile there to make between my said spanked assness and America and their foreign policy, particularly NATO, entirely how they operate. Because the Ukraine is currently being invaded, regardless of how anyone wants to call it, whatever we want to call it, whatever word, fanciful word you want to call it. You can call it a fucking sock hop. Doesn't mean they don't have tanks in Crimea. But to grossly sum it up, NATO told the Ukraine about 15 fucking years ago, we're going to let you in NATO, hang tight. We don't have a plan, but we'll figure it out. Won't take that long. Fast forward to fucking now, they're still not in, but they're kind of in. Like, they're in, but they're not in. They're kind of like how Puerto Rico. Actually, a better example would be like Guam. How Guam is related to America. Like, is it? I don't know. It's not. I don't think Guam is like, a territory in the same way Puerto Rico is. It just doesn't feel like it. I don't know if. Well, obviously, my feeling is not how geography works. But I just feel like Guam, whenever you look at a map, it's like America. And then at the bottom, someone just in very, very small Times New Roman font just typed Guam and just ink blot somewhere in the middle of the ocean. I don't know where I thought this would end up with Guam, but Russia's there. Russia wants the Ukraine for a few reasons. A few scary reasons that you might not be aware of. The obvious ones are natural resources. It's rich in fucking, cobalt, probably, things that could be put in batteries and things of that nature. Just picture, like, Russian villains and, like, the thing, like, they're building a rocket. Picture just weapons that, like, a James Bond-type character is preventing from being let loose. Those are the things probably built in the Ukraine by people in the Ukraine historically pretty fucking adept at doing such things and building those aforementioned products. So, that's one element. The other component that a lot of people I don't think really comprehend as to why Russia really wants the Ukraine is because Russia or Putin and then therefore Russia, it's almost like a spiritual cause. It's not a matter of we want the Ukraine. They don't even comprehend Ukraine. It's almost like a China-Taiwan situation. They think the Ukraine is Russia. It just is. And they think anyone, particularly representatives of NATO or anyone who's there to enforce the fact that we get two separate flags from that part of the world is an act of provocation. It's hostile because in their mind, that's Russia. NATO is sending their weapons, their tanks, their 3,000 troops there. That's a provocation. That's an act of war. And the Ukraine, what's funny about the whole situation is I can't really 100% get a read, get a vibe, get a tell on what the actual, fucking people in the Ukraine want to do. Maybe we should ask, shouldn't that answer, at the very least, be more readily available in our media? Now, I hate to sound naive, and forgive me if I do, but fuck you if you think so. No one knows what the fuck is going on, okay? There's a war happening, and we spent the several weeks leading up to the war, everyone convinced that there wasn't a war happening. Like, you're not going to trick me. I'm not falling for it this time. Meanwhile, Putin's like, America, stop talking about a war. You're going to push someone into, starting a war as if he wasn't the other side of the fucking potential war. So then that is confusing as shit. But this is all over the Ukraine. And a lot of people who think they're very smart, they're very well-read. The easiest geographical argument is that the Ukraine borders Europe. Russia, very big. Russia, very bad. Russia get Ukraine. Russia get even very bigger, very badder, very closer to Europe. That's a gross summary of the whole plot outline. And all that's true. And all of that, what is very important to highlight about that particular argument is it's real. It's tangible. Whether or not that's even the first priority of any of the sides involved, if it happens, that's a real physical thing in the world that has tangible effects. Because Russia would get closer to Europe. And you shouldn't live completely concerned like the sky's falling all the time, because these superpower countries that you always essentially see gang up in pretty much good guys versus bad side, Axis powers versus, the Allies, basically those are the teams throughout history. It's not like, it's not like it's on site, we got to shoot you if we see you. These companies, well, the fucking Russia might as well be a company. These giant countries, they do have professional economic relationships with other countries that are dependent for their economy to exist. Russia is the only, I'm pretty sure, natural gas supplier for all of Europe. So it's not like Russia's like, we're just sitting here waiting to blow up Europe when the time's right, because they make most of their stupid Russian money, Prussian francs. I don't fucking know a Prussian franc, is that what they use in Russia? Or do they just use snow as a currency? Those fucking idiots. Cool it. I don't know how it works up there. But what is happening is alarming to me for a whole lot of reasons, because we don't want Russia to get bigger and badder and get closer to Europe. But you don't have to, it's not like there's going to be a nuclear war at any time, because these countries can only exist because their economies are dependent on the existence of the countries that they're claiming to want to go into war with. And you should also always remember, if you've paid attention even a minute to a history class that was even half good in high school, war is the number one booster for an economy. Our economy here in America, newsflash, knock, knock, if you're not in the top 1% on OnlyFans in the world and listen to this podcast, it ain't showing any signs of getting financially better here. Inflation is only going to keep inflating, and that's bad, and there's really no reason to think otherwise. So there's one reason, on the list of pros and cons that America would want to get into war. But another thing that I find very interesting with this war thing here with Russia and the Ukraine is that no one just seems to fucking ask, hey, what does the Ukraine want to do? It's not available. You can watch any news channel. All they talk about is Russia invades the Ukraine. Or last week, Russia's not going to invade the Ukraine, which is confusing, and that's not the point here. The larger point is if they present the motive as over the Ukraine, no one really says, what does the Ukraine want to do? Do they want to rejoin Russia? Do they not? And then, of course, there's been, in 2014, there was the minor revolution where Viktor Yanukovych just went into fucking hiding. He disappeared in a cloud of smoke, 3 yards in a cloud of smoke. It was a real smart run out of that white football player, a real gym rat. There was, enough evidence to think the Ukraine people didn't want to rejoin Russia. But there are 2 cities in the Ukraine that are solidly separatists that said, hey, we want to be Russia again. And Russia was like, what's that? We'll send more tanks over there to help you guys out. But what's crazy is this is not an answer available anywhere. And isn't that funny? Isn't that weird? And I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't get involved in the war. I'm not making a judgment on that just yet. But believe me, I fucking will. And it'll probably be right. If the motive behind an event that can cause a world war is over whether or not a small country should belong to a larger country, which it used to, don't you think we would have ample evidence? Maybe we would do a survey. Maybe we would get some Quinnipiac University involved. Wouldn't we have some type of a general idea as to how the Ukraine felt about this? And there are, and I'm not trying to like make joke of the fact that there are generally people there whose lives are being threatened. They've been killed. They're being conscripted. It's a war. It's not good. And the Ukrainian president's like, NATO, help us, help us, help us. But like, the Ukrainian presidential office doesn't have the highest and strongest historical track record of integrity. So I don't know what they're doing over there. NATO hadn't been able to make up their mind how the fuck they want to help for the last 15 fucking years. So they're kind of, in my book, an element responsible because you had 15 fucking years. And it's not like you could just sit and wait for Putin's term to run out. Moron. That's not how it works over there in Russia. He may have the title of a president, but we're still talking about a group of people that pickled Rasputin's dick because they thought he was a wizard. So, wild card. But what I find fucking fascinating is just how people, their minds are like scrambled on this. Everyone has an opinion that is wildly underinformed and overly represented. I have absolutely no idea how everyone became an expert on foreign policy. And partly that's because the media is shoving war down your throat. I could have made a mom joke there. But I didn't, because I'm growing as a person. And your mom is too, because she's fat. You have a fat mother. Don't mean I love her any less, but she's huge. Absolutely ginormous. Literally one of the fattest moms, I think, in the world. But I still got love for her, as do the streets. But what's fascinating, to me at least, about this whole Russian problem, let's just call it, is just how fundamentally the general opinion is all over the place. I didn't think this was that crazy of a war or a military conflict to wrap your head around. Ukraine borders Europe, Russia's bad, Russia wants Ukraine, Europe doesn't want that. It's pretty simple, I thought. I thought this was a pretty obvious one. And Vlad, I don't know, I obviously don't know the intricacies of Vladimir Putin's life anymore since we broke up. But I don't think he's a genius. But I'm starting to think Russia's smarter than I thought because they're the mind games with these people. I had no idea they were capable of such things because I heard countless podcasts, pundits, talking heads, journalists, pretend journalists, wannabe journalists, news anchors, people on the news, things like that, an actual anchor from a boat on a news desk. They all radically differed from we, the media, ourselves, are pushing the war, and that's the problem. Or people on podcasts giving hot takes like, this is a strategic disinformation campaign to combat inflation. Or some other people talking about, this is still MK Ultra, which I'm open to. Believe me, I'm always open to MK Ultra. And maybe that's still fucking going on. Who knows? It certainly kind of maybe feels like it. There's all of these takes, like, we're not going to get tricked into another useless and needless war. And then there's politicians running on that. There was fucker Carlson talking about, how important is the Ukraine? Do we really need to get involved potentially with a war with Russia? Because a war, I need to remind everyone, again, is bad. And fucker Carlson, most of his opinions can be a tad bit insufferable. The only one worse on that station's that guy, Jesse Walters. Fuck his whole face. But Tucker Carlson, not a Rhodes Scholar. Phenomenal haircut, don't take that from him, but not a Rhodes Scholar. But on this point, particularly, he kind of broke from what you would think would be the traditional Republican way of doing things, in that there's not a war we don't love. There's not a war we don't want to get involved in. Fucker Carlson took a turn and said, wait, why do we need to get involved in this? And again, I'm not saying I agree with him, and I'm also not saying we should, jump head first into a war with Russia again, but it's interesting that he says that, and then the left call him a Russian agent. He's a part of misinformation. He's this, he's that. What happened, man? This is crazy. And this isn't the only issue this has happened on. I feel like what has been left and what has been right has switched sides. I don't know how that came to be or how that happened, but it's weird. Because traditionally, let's go traditionally, philosophically speaking, a conservative is someone who wants you involved the least or most conservative amount in their fucking life. So it's pretty much whatever you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anyone, you can do, is at least a gross summary of the philosophical concept of a conservative. And a liberal, vice versa, would take the opposite. They want an organization or a government or some type of organized body to get involved, to provide public works or take care of the needs of a population, to make sure everyone's quality of life hits a certain standard or baseline. That was originally the breakdown, and that would be represented in modern society in terms of things like gay marriage or climate change. Somehow this has changed wildly, particularly when it came to war. Because, when Bush was in president, all the Republicans, the war people, Dick Cheney, fucking all of that, Halliburton, it was like a thing that, like, Republicans love war. We love it. It's awesome. Let's do it. Let's go give America to the world and stuff. Right up their ass and throat if they want it. And Democrats were, the lefties who went to rallies and protested things, or Hollywood liberals who said war's bad, like Sean Penn saying Venezuela or whatever. And now, speaking of fucking Sean Penn, who you may think is insufferable, I would get it if you think, boy, does he look like he sucks? Sure, probably. But I also kind of love him. I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to explain it, because he looks like he has some terrible ideas, but he also is confident as shit expressing them, and he's made it very clear he doesn't give a fuck how you feel about them, which I can admire. So Sean Penn, saying all that to say this, Sean Penn, at a time when everyone is fleeing the Ukraine, decided to board a plane with a small documentary crew and absolutely no one interested in distributing once he's done with it, fly to the Ukraine to be boots on the ground and film up-to-date, live video content as to the events happening in Kiev. Sean Penn, the actor, our best shot at video journalism. Don't you miss the days when Anderson Cooper was your live video correspondent? Back when the CIA intern was live in the field instead of the Hollywood actor who seems too cool for the system now. So I do war documentary. What the flying fuck is going on? I saw Variety tweet it, and I quote verbatim, Sean Penn is on the ground in the Ukraine. And I stopped for a second, and I thought, Sean Penn enlisted, that's good. That's what we need. Because when he tried to do that, his version of Taken or whatever, it fell flat at the box office, bud. Go write another useless book, Bob Honey Who Can't Do Stuff, or write good books, apparently. But your hair is pretty cool for a dude in his 50s. I will give you that objectively. What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on with this war right now? This is a traditionally easy war to wrap your head around. They want land, we can't let them have it. But yet, everyone in our media is sending out mixed messages to the point where no one truly, and it's not even their fault at this point, could ascertain what the motives are, what is happening, what the Ukraine actually feels, what we're actually doing as America, what we're doing in terms of sending troops or supplies, or what's NATO's plan, what's Russia's plan. Because Russia, we have live video evidence of last week, if anyone's memory fucking stretches that far back enough, saying we are not invading, this is not a war, we're not calling it a war. And then Putin gave a live speech in which he gave a goddamn rousing. I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to take that from him. That speech he gave would have rallied me for Mother Russia. In fact, it kind of did. Saying the Ukraine is ours, it's spiritually part of Russia. That is not a speech you give after you're denying, almost acting worried of the potential idea of a war. You don't say war, hushed tones. Don't mention war. We don't want war. And then 48 hours later, give a televised speech in which you profess the spiritual importance of the Ukraine to the Russian people. That is, at the very least, a tad bit oxymoronic. And I see all this, and then I start thinking, like, damn, did I really underestimate the intelligence of the Ruskies? Because, lest we forget, MK Ultra, the program in this country responsible for people being injected with things unknowingly to them, children being kidnapped, sex slaves, assassins, Johnny Gosh, look into that story. A bunch of wild shit. MK Ultra is responsible for pretty much any story on the internet. If you were to read it or come across it and be like, wow, that sounds awful, evil, and probably not true. If there's enough of them and we're just playing a statistical math game, let's say 1 out of every 100 of those crazy stories is true. 1 out of actually, okay, so 1 out of those 100 crazy stories are true. Each one of those stories, MK Ultra and our government is 100% responsible for. You understand what I'm saying? All of the craziest shit the government has done, black ops, to its own people, falls under that umbrella program. That program started here because literally we just thought Russia was doing it, and Russia might be discovering some shit about, people being psychic or whatnot. So we better fucking do it over here. And then, of course, we found out some people are psychics, and then it got even weirder from there. But, we'll get on that later, or we'll get on that sometime last week. But then I think the media is clearly in the pocket of whatever element of the government wants it to be in its pocket, because that's just how it is. That's what happens. There are literally people who host shows who get paid from super PACs. That's what it is. So why is it so poignantly confusing in its message, the Ukraine and this conflict right now with the media? You can't get a straight idea from anybody. Why is that? Well, you want everyone confused, and a tenet of war, particularly now, today, is the media war. The media war is really how you lay a groundwork for an actual war. It's all about messaging, branding, PR, because that's what all of this is. You need a good social media guy. It was probably the fucking hypothetical grandson at the Kremlin with the laptop. So I say this to say, is the media we're getting here in America that's so confusing, like noticeably fucking absurdly confusing, that has to be some element of Russia's base level media war in the war, right? That would be what that is. And then I'm like, well, shit, but then MK Ultra still. So who knows what's going on? How much of this is planned? How much of it's not planned? But what's important when you get really confused and you start to introduce these very big concepts and hypotheticals in your mind is to always remember and just keep a mental checklist of the tangible things that have happened in the world. From whether or not whatever your proposed hypothesis is, whether it's true or not, what physically happened as a consequence of it. For example, the ideology of the left and right when it comes to war. Historically, the left was not for it at all. They were always the people protesting war. And the right was always like, hey, let's go make money off war. However, now, thanks to, I want to say, mostly the whole fake Russiagate thing with Trump, now, if you're someone like fucker Carlson, who is a Republican, but voices any level of suspicion, let's say, against a necessity to go to war with Russia, everyone on the left points at him and says, Russian agent. It's a little weird. That's a little McCarthy-ish almost, right? It's almost like, he's a sympathizer. He's a communist. It's literally a 180. It is the actual, each side's picked up their shit, their books, and switched and crossed to the other side of the room, and now they are wearing each other's jerseys. What's going on? What is that? And sure, the two major dominant political ideologies in America could just be divided on this one issue. They might just get it wrong. They might have changed their mind, particularly based on the specific set of circumstances in this instance. But of course, politicians don't do that. That's not how they make their decisions at all. So really, what is going on? Because I don't think people have really caught or noticed the fact that that is what's happened. It seems like Republicans are like, hey, let's not rush into war. And Democrats are like, let's rush into war. Weird. And this is me just thinking like a child, probably, with very base level narratives. I'm just forcing into this. But at least in my mind, there's the super evil people in both sides, in the Democrats and the Republicans. But the super evil bad people in the Democrats, at least, if you are to believe all of the crazy conspiracy theories, they're all funded by George Soros. We all know this, right? Or it's true. I don't know, but let's just say it is for argument's sake. And we already know that his strategy would be, if you want to, topple something, you put in a very left-leaning DA. And then you finance an even farther left-leaning DA to be his opponent in the upcoming election. And you just keep funding candidates and keep pushing things to the left. So in my mind, that's where the unlimited money comes from if we're thinking or talking about political decisions being made that are benefiting shadowy evil groups. On the flip side, on the Republican side, They're all rich, but just from being rich, from fucking oil companies or privately owned, weapons manufacturing companies. They have their money. They're not really, like, in my mind, at least, on the payroll of someone else, which was how I always distinguished. That's not how you say it, but I said it. I always separated the two that way in my head, whether that's right or wrong. So it is particularly fucking interesting to me that it seems like, without anyone noticing, one side has switched a core tenet of what I thought they were selling. So take a minute to think about that. We have supposedly a progressive we have the first we have the first female black vice president in history. That's historical. She might be black, I think. I don't know. Or she's Trinidadian. You'd have to ask her and how she feels right now. But supposedly we have a very progressive administration in office right now, and it did not take very long for there to be this convergence of neo-McCarthyism from the Democrats against the Republicans, calling communists, and this newfound spirited belief in bang, 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 shoot 'em up patriotism, and our social responsibility to spread American democracy down the throats of everyone else in the world. When did that happen and why? Why did that happen? That's something's up. That has to have happened for a reason, because that's fucking huge. You have to be aware of people's motives. Someone whose motives I have called into question repeatedly are that of Edward Snowden, who I am firmly of the belief was a Russian spy the whole fucking time. Now, you may ask me, Colin, how did you come to that hot-ass take, to that crazy assertion, to that claim, that lascivious claim? And the way that I realized that Edward Snowden was a Russian spy was I just thought about it. That's really it. I just stopped and thought about it and realized I'm not stupid and no shit. Before you in your head or wherever you are and you're listening to this and you want to jump out and say, no, blah, 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 this is why, blah. Take a minute, take a step back, and I'm going to ask you, what side does the guy work for? Where is he currently? That's it. What he did, and it's very crafty, and that's what makes me think the Russians have gotten smart. Snowden stole documents from our military and intelligence community because he believed the practices of these communities were using technologies and methods that were not legal and violated the rights of Americans, which is noble and objectively fucking true and happening to this day. In fact, there are news stories, it feels like once a month, where this groundbreaking revelation that the NSA is spying on you somehow keeps happening, that everyone keeps having collectively. So Snowden does all, and that's good. And that's the whole Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Hollywoodization side of what happened with Edward Snowden. But like I said earlier, that's a theory. That's a presentation. What's important to remember are the tangible, physical consequences that have happened in the world because of that. So what did Snowden do after he snuck everything onto that USB and then quietly walked out of the tunnel in Hawaii and, Oliver Stone faded to black? Well, he took all of that literally top secret information and first went to China. Weird first choice. And then leaves China and goes to Russia. Weird second choice. And now, in my second bit of evidence in my Snowden was a spy the whole time speech, he just looks kind of Russian. And I know it sounds like I'm making a joke here, and I kind of am, but also like I'm actually kind of being serious. Like, just look at a picture and just keep the thought in your mind of like, he's Russian. And then once you're like, oh, he's right, you're like, oh, I see it all the time. He's fucking, he looks like a vulture. He looks like a land bird. Looks like a featherless land bird who loves computers, and he's Russian apparently. So that he looks like he never smiles or laughs at all. So the check Ruski. You know what I'm saying? Checkmate Ruski. And then all he does is spend time all day tweeting about the U.S. government's doing this, they're doing that, which the U.S. government's evil. It's mafia. Any government is organized crime. But, dude, also, when you're just hanging out in exile in our literal enemy, one, we get it. Shut up. Two, again, what's the consequence of that? Because he might be right, but what he's doing is creating, and I know this is a very fine line because you don't ever want to control public thought for the better of something, because who are you to decide what the fuck the better is? But what Snowden's doing very strategically is spreading distrust of the government. And distrust of the government's very healthy, and it's important. But it's something much like alcohol and, your mom's neck ability. It has to be treated responsibly. You have to be pretty smart and intelligent. You can't be a bozo susceptible to stupidness and be distrusting of the government, because that's so fucking easily exploitable, particularly by enemies, particularly during a time of war. So be distrusting of your government, but don't have someone who at least 50-50 works for the enemy as a spy be the guy telling you to be distrusting of your government all the fucking time. Dude, you are in exile, and if you were to come back here, you would get 23 and a half hours a day in a windowless black cell underground here. Why were you on the Joe Rogan podcast, okay? No, it just doesn't add up. When you stop and take a second and think about it, you're like, how could I have been so stupid? We spent the better part of the last 5 years hearing about how Russia, all of a sudden, their tech skills have gotten way up. Someone took a class at their local library and just figured out that we're all about strategic misinformation. It's all about the media war. It's the base of any war. And I think that 5 or so years of Trump and Russiagate, we were experiencing Russia setting up their media war. And Snowden was doing a great job getting his responsibility of the demographic of people who think they're smarter than they actually are. And I was in that demo. I fell for it. I fucking hate governments. I was all for Snowden. I'm like, this dude's the shit, letting us know governments suck. But what I should have known is no shit, governments suck. Why is he telling me? And why do I know about it? Because there are no accidents. Something like that doesn't just coincidentally happen, and all of the events that you know about it, you, some guy not fucking involved, some guy in line at McDonald's, know all about it. You know exactly what happened. You know the events in the chronological order during which Edward Snowden stole declassified documents from the NSA base in Hawaii. You know exactly what happened and what everyone's motives were throughout the entire time and who was good or bad, who was the stand-up hoe or fall-down bitch in that case. Mwah, chef's kiss on that one out of me. No, that's fucking preposterous. Keeping all of that in mind, the real-world consequences of what he was doing was spreading mistrust. And if you think this is just circumstantial evidence out of me, allow me to offer you even more. Snowden applied to be a Russian citizen today. Interesting fucking timing, I think, right? It's a little weird. I mean, he's probably not going to get it processed right away because Russia's busy going to war, you would think, right? And if you were a nerd familiar with Russian law, you'd probably think, wait a minute, anyone familiar with Russian immigration law knows that someone cannot apply and be granted Russian citizenship unless they denounce the previous country that they are coming from. Snowden clearly hasn't done that, so he legally can't be a Russian citizen. You would have been right if you thought that 2 months ago before Russia changed that law. Sure seems like Russia would have changed that law for a very specific person. That's not something you just happen to do 2 months before you're not going to invade the Ukraine. Emphasis on not going to invade. Strange fucking again. And of course, Snowden's best, bit of evidence was, listen, this might seem suspicious, but I want to have a kid, and this is what's best for the kid. Fuck you, you gold-digging hoe. You land bird, you ostrich-looking vulture crane-necked fuck. Because you're just using a kid. You're child trapping. You're using the baby to trap the government of America into not coming and beheading you for treason, you taint. You perfidious taint, okay? Snowden's a spy. I don't know how else to say that. And if you need any reminder, follow me on Twitter. It's literally kind of all I tweet about is just, Snowden, the jig is up, Snowden, the jig is up. So Snowden, the jig is up. Be aware of that. He's a spy. All of these events are coming together at such a weird time, too. And it makes a lot of sense to me because the media is doing the most to make it not make a lot of sense to anybody at all. So the fact that there is so much information, so much of it being wrong, fired at you all the time, that you miss these fine little key points like Snowden applying to be a Russian citizen today. That's a little fucking weird. Russia changing that law 2 months ago. Things like that you get missed, and then you don't even notice that, like, wait a minute, are the Democrats the one hawking war and, like, doing everything they can to get their progressive, loving administration to go bring tanks to a different country? And now they're the party that points fingers and calls spy at anyone who says, hey, maybe we don't go to war. How did that happen? Because at least one theory is that the evil guy, at least on the left, is funding the next left person to keep pushing us left and left and left. And if you go so far left, as we know with circles, if you hit the two furthest points on a circle, you've actually hit the same spot. So what would be the goal of all of this? Well, there's a whole heck of a lot of, let's say, important books, ancient books, prophecies, a bunch of soothsaying, a whole bunch of this and that future telling, Madame Zeroni type people, saying that there's only going to be 3 world wars. But there will be 3, mark my words. This is aforementioned psychic wizard person, hypothetically I'm talking about. A lot of people predict 3 world wars. And world wars start over some more or less mundane, not germane to you, usually conflict, that because of bureaucracy, red tape, pre-existing diplomatic relationships, are forced to bring other countries into a conflict, which can result in an exponential type of increase where millions of people from all over the world are fighting people over a conflict that they have literally lost track of, like whisper down the lane. The only thing that seems very strange about this to me right now, speaking as someone who's been alive through exclusively calamity, is it seems like this time, this secret that the media was pushing out, they really whispered down the lane as fast as possible so no one would hear.